As far as like why we're here today, well, for years, I think it's probably been 10 years now, Joel, you might know more. We've been coming down to Chicago, and some of you may not know this, but here in Chicago is where all the world food prices are determined pretty much. In fact, a lot of prices are determined here at the Board of Trade, Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So we thought, well, it would be appropriate for farmers to come down to Chicago and speak truth to power to the folks who are determining their fate every day at the Board of Trade. And believe it or not, many of the traders there, I don't know if any of you know any personal traders, they usually wear big badge numbers, and they're walking around at lunch hour. You will see them tomorrow if you join us at noon outside the CME. Many of them have never actually met a farmer.
And my family has owned and operated farms and worked in Monroe County, Wisconsin since 1872. And I've had so many family members put out of the dairy industry by low milk prices that it leaves you asking the question, why? And global dairy prices are pretty much set by the price of 40-pound blocks of cheddar. And up until 1996, 40-pound blocks of cheddar were traded at the National Cheese Exchange in Grebe May, Wisconsin. In October of 96, dairy farmers' milk prices dropped by 30% after one day's trading. An investigation launched by then Governor Tommy Thompson discovered that it was Kraft Foods that dumped the cheese on the market, that crashed the milk prices, and the result was the National Cheese Exchange was closed and trading was moved to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And it became less transparent, more murky, more corrupt, and even more farmers were put out of business.
Our trade deals are destroying America. Our trade deals are destroying America.
So on April 17th is a global day of peasant action commemorating the execution of 17 farmers in Brazil. And so we have actions around the globe on this day. And so we come to let people know that global trading of dairy products, corn, wheat, soybeans, how their food prices are dictated, how farmers' prices are dictated, and it's a lose-lose for consumers and a lose-lose for farmers.
Let me tell you about white-collar crime happening in this building. Oh my God, it was amazing. Modern-day mafia. Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is basically like NAFTA for the Pacific. So it's a huge expansion of the trade deals into a whole another region of the world. It hasn't been happening before. It has a lot of impacts in many sectors. Agriculture is a big one, for instance. So under a TPP, we will be basically dumping a lot of our commodities into countries like South Korea, Japan, driving farmers there out of business. And also in turn, we're going to be getting dumped on by other countries like New Zealand is planning to import massive quantities of milk protein concentrate, casein. These are like really cheap powdered dairy products that they can use to make cheese here. So one of our concerns about if TPP passes is that thousands of US dairy farmers would go bankrupt almost immediately because it's a lot cheaper to make knockdown low-grade dairy products like Velveeta or Kraft Singles from imported milk powder rather than actually buying fresh fluid milk from US farmers. So that's one of the impacts of TPP. It'll also downgrade a lot of food safety standards, consumer right to know. So there's concerns about, will consumers in Japan be forced to eat genetically modified foods that they don't want to? Will we have more melamine, for instance, contaminants coming in products here? So there's a lot of food safety concerns too with opening up our borders to just a reckless, food imports.
The TPP is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, so it's involving all of the countries on the Pacific Rim, 13 countries in total, will have been engaged in months for trade negotiations through the World Trade Organization. And in order to expedite that process after months of grueling negotiations and posturing by all the countries involved, Fast Track will grant the President full trade authority to present the trade bill, and Congress will have no right to all they can do is vote yes or no on the bill. They cannot review the bill, they cannot change the bill, and so that's why we're trying to stop Fast Track trade authority, because we believe that Congress should keep its constitutional right to debate the bill. And we feel that's just and necessary. And we feel if Congress is given the opportunity to vote on the bill on its own, that the debate will shred it, because there are so many things hidden in it and so many bad policies in it that it never get passed. So the key to stopping it is stopping the Fast Track Trade Authority and not giving anybody the right to read it, look at it, or review it, just pass it.
We're gonna beat back the fast track. We're gonna beat back the fast track.
They know that, don't they?
Oh, they know that. Yep, absolutely they know that. But, you know, again, it's all about secret deals and conspiracies and giving multinational corporations the power to move product from wherever they can extract labor and resources the cheapest and move it to wherever the income is and the highest profits to sell it. So poor countries will not get food, rich people will get food, you know, poor countries will be asked to produce things at a very cheap rate at no pay and then transport it to countries that have all the money and all the power and all the say, and it will further destroy the economies of these countries and will further put people off the land and further push things into the hands of corporate control.
They say fast track, we say fight back, fast track.
Fight back!
Fast track, fight back.
Well, fast track is basically a way to do an end run around democracy. So we have the problem where these agreements are mostly negotiated in secret. Congress is not allowed to actually see a lot of the provisions. I mean, these documents are thousands of pages long. And so part of the problem is they are trying to basically force Congress to have a yes or no vote on legislation they don't even have a chance to look at. No amendments, no real debate. And so that's why they call it fast track. It's basically railroading through a trade deal without democratic say. And that's why they're really, we just think it's a horrible way for democracy is not functioning. It's basically corporations write these agreements. We have no input on what they say. We can't even see what they say, and then our politicians are basically bribed, lobbied to approve them without, even our knowledge in some cases. So that's part of the problem with fast track. So the way to stop TPP, of course, is to basically vote down fast track. Because if they don't have fast track authority, they're not going to bring the TPP up to a real debate in Congress. They can't afford to do that. Because if people knew the truth about these trade deals, they wouldn't want them. They'd realize they're giving away their rights, and they're jeopardizing the safety of their family and future generations, the environment, to basically corporate greed.
So through the 80s, we saw a 50% loss across the board of our nation's farmers. We started the process of going to corporate farms, and people don't realize that the U.S. used to have 3.5 million operating dairy farms. We now only have 45,000 total dairy farms in the U.S., most of them corporate farms, referred to as CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations. And so the consolidation that took place in the poultry industry, then the hog industry, then the beef industry is now happening in the dairy industry, where your food is strictly being produced by corporate entities and corporate manufacturing facilities, and the family farm is nearly gone. You look at the crisis taking place with the water being shut off in Detroit, to thousands of people being evicted from their homes that should have jobs in Motor City that don't. What does that tell us? When John Deere is laying off thousands of workers right now across the nation because they know that they are not going to be able to sell John Deere farm equipment because there's nobody left to buy it, and it's too expensive to buy, and there's not enough corporations left to buy enough tractors to keep John Deere afloat, what does that tell us? And when you have milk or equipment supply companies that are now fighting for a handful of accounts, let's put in the equipment for one massive CAFO. That's one sale. Who's going to get it? Westphalia, De La Valle, Bomatic, who? It's going to make or break one company. Nobody realizes that when Washington bailed out GM and Chrysler, that it wasn't just Washington saving two American car corporations. It was Ford and Toyota calling Washington and begging them to save GM and Chrysler because there was only one company left in the entire world that makes all of the buttons, all of the switches, all of the door handles, and all of the wiper blades for every vehicle manufactured in the world. And if them two auto manufacturers went down, the entire world's auto industry was going to collapse. Nobody heard that story, but check out the book by Barry Lynn called Cornered. Reveals the true nature of business, the true consolidation of everything we eat, we wear, and when we're down to 2 or 3 poultry companies and 2 or 3 beef manufacturers, and that, you know, what does that tell us about them? The safety of our food supply, the availability of it, and just the looming threat of corporate control. And now we add TPP to it, the posing trade agreement, where U.S. markets would be open to the biggest global trader in dairy products, Fonterra in New Zealand. The last of U.S. dairy markets, if fast track authority is given, the TPP is passed, and that it'll be the end of the U.S. dairy industry, except for corporations that own dairy farms as a tax write-off for other corporations that they own. It's not a system the American people want to have.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that the CME here is, like you said, sort of a global casino for commodities. So they trade here everything from, you know, cheddar, blocks of cheddar that set world milk prices, to feather meal, which is fed to dairy cows as a feed supplement, very dangerous material, to, you know, carbon credits, lumber, timber, fertilizer. I mean, all these commodities are traded here. And the ironic thing is most of the traders here who do that have never met a farmer. I mean, they have no interest in what they're trading. It's pure speculation. In fact, 60% of all the trading that's done here is by speculators, and not by anyone actually actual interest in the products they're trading. So you would think like food companies here actually care about the food trade, but somewhat. I mean, a lot of it's just speculators. We can make money off anything. So I mean, it is like a casino, and part of the problem is you have what's called a thin market. So you have a very small percentage of the total trade is actually negotiated and traded here. So in the case of cheddar cheese, only 2% of the cheddar cheese in the US is actually traded at the CME, but then that 2% of the market dictates all fluid milk prices for the whole world. So it's very easy to manipulate that type of thing. And so that's called racketeering, price fixing, which is why in this case, you know, corrupt co-ops like Dairy Farmers of America have been convicted of price fixing here. We just found out 2 weeks ago that Kraft is going to be convicted for manipulating world wheat prices here at the CME. So this type of behavior is actually very common. It's rare that's enforced. And so part of our reason to be here today is to expose, you know, this type of sort of corruption that happens at this trading platform. And there's like very little public accountability or knowledge of what's going on here. And unfortunately that ricochets around the world, affects farmers, consumers everywhere. And if we have these global trade deals like TPP, and it's just going to get worse because all that global trade is going to be happening through this exchange. So for them, it's like a money-making opportunity. It's just more money. I mean, they get hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies to run this outfit here. And they've threatened to move to Indiana if they don't get that from the city of Chicago. They're the largest, most profitable corporation in Chicago. And so they should be paying their taxes. I mean, I have to pay my taxes. Every farmer here has to pay their taxes. Why does the CME get tax breaks when they're the most profitable corporation here? So yes, they should be giving back to this community. They should not be, you know, ripping off the taxpayers of Chicago. And the other thing is like the white collar crime that happens here should stop. I mean, it's a horrible, stain on the reputation. Well, Chicago, presumably, people here want to be proud of their city. The fact that the, Attorney General of Illinois is allowing this to happen. I mean, if this was happening in New York, the New York State Attorney General would have cracked down on it long ago. Why is the Attorney General of Illinois tolerating this criminal activity here? Why is the Justice Department tolerating it? It should have been stopped long ago, and by not doing anything, you're aiding and abetting criminal activity. So not only are you giving them tax breaks, but then you're allowing them to do this crime on your watch. I mean, that just seems untenable and bad,